Lighthouse Project. Tonight's learning is dedicated in memory of Dvorah Fega Bat Shmuel and is also for the Refuah Shlema, the speedy recovery of Menachem Mendel ben Sarah Batya. This week we are learning the Torah portion called Vayakhel. Vayakhel is very interesting in the fact that it is the second to last Torah portion in the book of Exodus. In our 5 books of Moses, we're now next week going to finish the book of Exodus, the second one, and this is the second to last Torah portion in the book of Exodus. Many years, this Torah portion is said and read along with the following one. However, since this year we have 2 Adars, right? Purim is postponed by 1 month, so is Pesach postponed by 1 month. Therefore, we separate these 2 parashas, these 2 Torah portions, and now each one has their own week. What that means for us is that we get to spend a full hour or a full extra week learning each parasha, each Torah portion, instead of putting them all together. Tonight's class is called Mr. Know-It-All. And we're going to delve into different things and concepts that we think we know the answer to everything. Pay attention, even though my wife is not in the room, pay attention as I said Mr. Know-It-All and I didn't call it Mrs. Know-It-All. And that is actually a very big key to what we're going to see towards the end of the class. Let's take a step back before we delve into that practical aspect. The 5 last Torah portions of the book of Exodus are all dealing with the similar concepts. The concept primarily of the building of the tabernacle. That was the 5th to last parasha. That is Parashat Terumah. Parashat Terumah is when everybody comes and they make their pledges, their donations, their collections for the building of the tabernacle. The next one is the Tetzaveh, is the Torah portion where Moses is commanded to make the garments, the beautiful garments that the Kohen Gadol is going to wear in his service. The next parasha, last week's parasha, we read Ki Tisa, that is the half shekel, as well as the sin of the golden calf. We're all familiar with the sin of the golden calf. This week's Torah portion, we are speaking about the actual building of the tabernacle, and next week is a summary. It's a recollection. Now, what type of summary we're talking about? Listen, this is not the main point, but it's something very interesting. Moses and the Jewish people, they fundraised a lot for the Mishkan. A lot of fundraising took place. A lot of gold, a lot of silver, a lot of copper, a lot of jewels. Moses had an accounting to where each and every part and portion went. It was known how much every person gave and where it went to, in order to make sure that there was no misappropriation to any of the funds that went anywhere. And even Moses, at his high level, he didn't want anyone to ask any questions, and he wanted it all squeaky clean in order that he could show that what he's doing is specifically for God and for the good of the Jewish people. Moses goes up to Mount Sinai. We learned last week that he goes up 3 times. Each time was for 40 days. Each time was for a different purpose. The first time he went up to receive the tablets, the 10 commandments. On his way down, he comes, he sees the Jewish people sin with the golden calf. He breaks them. The next time, he goes up the next day. He goes up and he asks and pleads for forgiveness from God. God says, okay, we'll do it. But you now need to go back and tell the Jewish people, then come back up and get the second tablets. He goes down, he tells them, behave. He comes back up, he gets the second tablets. That 120 days up in heaven, up in the skies, at the top of Mount Sinai, at the end of those days he comes down on the greatest day in our year. In our Jewish year, there is one greatest day. There's a lot of special days. The greatest day of our year is? You could hear, I want the mic to hear.
Yom Kippur.
Very good, Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the greatest day of our Jewish year. Why? I can't eat. I can't relax. I can't go fishing. I can't go boating. I can't do all of the things I like to do. How is that the greatest day of the year? It is a day which God set aside specifically as a day of atonement. A day that no matter what a person did in the previous year, no matter what a person ever did, as long as they come with true feelings of repentance, of sorrow, of regret, and want to be a better person, God wipes it all clean and He says, no problem, you're welcome. Where did this concept come from? It all came from being forgiven for the sin of the golden calf. The sin of the golden calf, that atonement, that forgiveness that was given to the Jewish people was given on Yom Kippur. Moses comes down on the 10th of Tishrei. The 10th of Tishrei is when he was given this message, go tell the Jewish people they are forgiven. And forevermore, that day is known to us as a day of atonement. When the unforgivable was forgiven, that's when it now became a day of atonement. That's the significance of the day of Yom Kippur. Now, why am I saying this? This week's Torah portion starts with a special word. The word is Vayakhel. Vayakhel comes from the terminology, the verbatim of Kahal. Kahal is a congregation. It's a gathering. What Moses was doing on the day after he comes down and he already told the Jewish people they're forgiven, he gathers them in an assembly, all together. And at that assembly, he now tells them something very special. What could he possibly tell the Jewish people? Moses, after being 120 days up at the top of the mountain, what could he possibly have to say to the Jewish people? Listen, I'm going to read it for you. He says, I'm going to read the first two verses. The first verse, this is in chapter 35, verse 1. Vayakhel Moshe et kol adat b'nei Yisrael. Moses gathers and he puts in an assembly all of the Jewish people. Everyone was there. Vayomer alehem, and he tells them, Ele hadevarim asher tziva Hashem la'asot otam. These are the commandments, the deeds that God has commanded you to do. But we know that already. Isn't this the Torah? Yes, he's bringing the Torah. He's bringing the second tablets. But now, look at the next verse. The next verse is as follows. Sheshet yamim te'aseh melacha. 6 days you shall work. 6 days of the week. Ubayom hashevi'i yeh lachem kodesh. And on the seventh day, it should be a holy day. It should be a special day. Shabbat Shabbaton Hashem, it's a day of rest for God as well as for us. Kol ha'oseh bo melacha yumat. And this is how the verse ends off. The Zera Shimshon's question. Many of our commentaries ask, why is Moses, out of all things to say, warning and teaching the Jewish people about keeping Shabbat, about our weekly worth ethic, to work 6 days and then to stop on the seventh? Why does he need to tell us that now? Okay, you can say that Moses as a rabbi, Moshe Rabbeinu, right? As every rabbi, a rabbi always has to say something. A rabbi always has to teach. So granted he had to say something, but why specifically something about Shabbat? Why didn't he say, if it's about right now one of the most important moments of the Jewish history, after the Jews were forgiven for the golden calf, speak about kashrut. Speak about eating kosher, not mixing milk and meat, making sure to slaughter the animal properly. And we have many, many laws. He could have spoken about the holidays. He could have spoken about tefillin. He could have spoken about the laws of family purity. No, Moses chooses to speak about Shabbat. Why? So the Zera Shimshon is going to give us a fascinating insight to what the true power of Shabbat is. And this is going to work against our common sense at first, until we really understand what the purpose of Shabbat is, and how that is actually the key to all of our success. Get ready. He quotes, and he says, the Talmud teaches us that if the Jewish people would have kept the first Shabbat that they had the opportunity to observe after they left Egypt, no other nation would have ever been able to dominate the Jewish people. Now look at how the sequence plays out. They leave Egypt. They're caught at the Sea of Reeds. Who's behind them? The Egyptians. They're pressuring them. They don't know where to go, either right into their hands or into the water. They cry, they pray, they scream, the sea splits, they go in. They come out. What happens when the Jewish people come out? Yes, they dance, they sing. What's the next thing that happens? What does everyone need after a good travel? A good meal. The first thing that comes down is man, the wonder bread. Man comes down, and the Jewish people are told 3 primary rules to observe with this man, this bread. Okay, so that we're familiar with this. This was bread that fell from the sky, like rain, like dew. It comes and it lands down on the ground, and they're told the following. Number 1, go out and collect only what you need. If today you need to eat, 10 pounds of food, it's a lot. But let's just say, so collect exactly what you need. That's number 1. Not more. Number 2, don't leave any over. Number 3, Friday morning, take your double portion. Because on Shabbat, nothing's going to come down. Perfectly. Out of the millions of Jews, everybody is listening. Except for, as I like to call them, the 2 hoodlums of our Bible. Does anyone know who the 2 hoodlums of our Bible are? Very good. Datan and Aviram. Why do I call them hoodlums? Because anytime there was chaos for the Jewish people, all the way from the time of the Exodus, they always had a part in it, until they finally were defeated with Korach. That was their last scheme, their last scoundrel. Going back, when do we get introduced to them first? When Moses kills the Egyptian. By proclaiming the name of God, the Egyptian drops dead. He was scared. He didn't want anyone to see him. The next day, the 2 of them tell him, we saw you. And then they went and told Paro exactly what Moses did. They were causing problems back then. They were causing problems with complaining. They were causing problems with everything, even when it came to this bread. You know what they did? They went out on Shabbat, on Saturday morning, and they took some of the bread they had from yesterday and they put it out. Why would they put it out? Because they're trying to prove that God and Moses are wrong. You said that there was nothing that's going to fall today. Look, it fell. There's plenty of bread out. So look how warped they were. They go, they put it out, then they run to call everybody, come, look, Moses is wrong, Moses is wrong. What happened in the meantime? The birds came to eat the bread. When the birds came to eat the bread, then no one saw that any bread came down. They thought that nothing went wrong. So Hashem made it a miracle as such. Do you know what we do with our leftover bread? This is a side point. We give our leftover bread to the birds. We don't throw out bread. Bread is significant to livelihood. No one wants to throw away parnasah. If anyone has any extra parnasah, throw it this way. Don't throw it in the garbage. Okay? The bread that we have is our blessing from God. We eat it, we keep it. If there's leftovers, we give it to the birds as a repayment for them sticking up to maintain the word of God that no bread would fall on that Saturday morning. What happens right away after the war of Amalek? Amalek comes and attacks. Why does Amalek attack? According to the Talmud, Amalek attacked. They were able to dominate over the Jewish people because the Jewish people as a whole did not keep that first Shabbat. Datan and Aviram, those 2 hoodlums, they broke Shabbat by carrying out the bread from where they were and going and sprinkling it all around outside the camp. By them breaking Shabbat, by them not making the whole Jewish nation as one complete the first Shabbat, that now doomed us, so to say. And that's what allowed Amalek to dominate us and any other nation in the future to ever dominate over the Jewish people. That's the first source he brings. That the Talmud says the keeping of Shabbat, that first Shabbat, would have spared us from all our misery. Number 1. Number 2, Talmud says the power of observing Shabbat, and this applies even to us. It wasn't only the first Shabbat, this is all Shabbats. The power of observing Shabbats grants atonement to every sin that there is, even the sin of idol worship. A person goes and worships idols. That means they are cheating on God. because you're not directing your attention and your connection to God. You're now putting it in another God, in a fake God. By doing that, you are doing one of the worst, and when you keep Shabbat, when you observe the Shabbat, Hashem is able to give atonement on that. Hashem is able to forgive. The Talmud says, the one who worships idols like Enosh. Who is Enosh? The way I like to classify and characterize Enosh is as follows. He was the great-grandson of God. Rabbi, that sounds Christian. How could he be the great-grandson of God? Listen to this very, very clearly. Who was the first man to live? Adam. Adam's son was Shet. Right? That's why we are called Semites. Shet. Yeah. Okay? After Shet we had... Shem, not Shet. Shem. Adam. Shem. And then we have Enosh. That would make, if Adam is the son of God and Shem is the grandson, that would make Enosh the great-grandson of God. Why is that important? Because Enosh was the first individual who worshipped another being, another power in his eyes, besides God. What he did was he looked at the world that he lived in and he said, this world is so awesome. This God that created the world, he didn't even deny it, is so powerful. How can I, who am so small and futile, connect to him and worship him and serve him? So he said, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to worship and serve God's creations, his greatest creations. So he looked at the sun and he said, the sun was created by God, just as the whole world. And I'm going to worship the sun in order that I can get close to God. And I'm going to do the same with the moon. I'm going to do the same with the water. I'm going to do the same with fire. And he did that with all of the great creations of God. However, that was against what God wanted. And it was a slippery slope. This is, by the way, the root in the creation of idol worship. It was from this man and his children and his followers. And it started with worshiping God through an intermediate, to only worshiping that intermediate and substituting God for the sun or for the moon or for the stars or for anything else. That's how idol worship was created. I'll give you another example. Have we all heard of a very famous name? Moses Mendelssohn. Yes? No? I hope so. The Sephardic boy is going to teach about Ashkenaz European history. Get ready, okay? In the 1800s, there was a man by the name of Moses Mendelssohn, and he was the founder of, as we call in Hebrew, the Haskalah. In English, we call it the Enlightenment. Enlightenment means an open mind of living in the world that we live in. Living a more worldly life. And what he was saying is, why does everybody all the Jews have to learn in the yeshivas and have their own schools? Why specifically? Let them go to the universities. Let them go to the Ivy League schools. Let us be more worldly. Now, I'm going to give us in a parenthesis, nowadays we would love to just have all of our children in university. We're already so far behind, because if they're not in university, lo alenu, they might be in the streets. So to see how the generations have degenerated, unfortunately. But back then, the Jewish population was in the yeshivas, in the Jewish schools, all of them. And this man came about and said, we can't be so close-minded. We can't be living our lives with horse shields and trying to evade the world that we live in. And he grew a very large following. And he did in some way have noble intentions. He wanted to make peace with the surrounding, with the world that they were living in. However, it was a slippery slope. It was so slippery that Moses Mendelssohn did not even have one Jewish grandchild. How so? His children were all Jewish. He was a rabbi. His name was Rabbi Moses Mendelssohn. His wife was Jewish. His children were Jewish. All of his children married non-Jews, which would mean that all of his grandchildren were unfortunately not Jewish. Why? He had a good idea. He had a great intention. He stepped off the mainstream. He stepped off what the intention of God was, and it unfortunately turned for the bad. Enosh did the same thing. God said, worship me. I'm giving you that open access. I'm granting it to you. However, by him going and substituting to someone else, he now ruined it. He now made it bad, and he brought idol worship to the world. The Talmud says that a person who keeps Shabbat like Enosh, not like anyone else. When you keep Shabbat, if you would commit idolatry like Enosh, meaning trying to still connect to God but in the wrong way, that's when a person gets a full atonement, and that is such a severe sin, all the more so for even other sins. The Zera Shimshon brings one more piece of Talmud before he ties it all together, and he says that if the Jewish people would have never committed the sin of the golden calf, no nation would have ever been able to enslave the Jewish people or hold them or take charge of them. And the Talmud proves it. How is it that the tablets came down? The tablets were one of the most fascinating creations the world has ever seen. The tablet was as follows. It was a piece of stone that by me standing on this side, I was able to see the letters that were on there, and I was able to see through them because they were carved in. It was carved through and through. On my side, I read it perfectly straight, as in Hebrew, from right to left. On your side, you also read it perfectly from right to left, and you were able to see me through because it was carved. So if I waved like this, you'd see my hand wave, and you would read it properly from right to left, and I would be able to read it properly from right to left. How is that possible? It's a godly creation. That's the way God created. God is not bound by time and space. So when He gives us a tablet as such, and it wasn't a screen, right? It wasn't like a tablet like we call like an iPad or a Samsung tablet. It was not those tablets. This was a stone tablet. How could it be? God had His way of creating this and making something so special. But listen to the terminology of the word engraved. The word engraved, I'm going to read to you the verse. The verse says as follows. Chapter 32, verse 16 says as follows. V'haluchot ma'aseh Elohim hema. That the tablets were a special creation of God. V'amichtav michtav Elohimu. And the writing, the calligraphy, the carving was done specifically by God. Charut al haluchot. They were engraved into the tablets. The Talmud says, don't read it as charut, engraved, ela cherut. Add a yud, which means freedom. When the Jewish people accepted the tablets, the 10 Commandments, on the stones, they were now supposed to be free forever. But they never accepted that first one. Remember the first tablets Moses breaks? The Talmud says, if Moses would have delivered those tablets to the Jews and the Jews would have accepted it, they would have never been enslaved or oppressed or dominated by another nation forevermore. So now come and let's put this all together. The Zera Shimshon says Moses tried so hard to beg forgiveness for the Jewish people from the sin of the golden calf. The first 40 days, well, not really his first set. His second set of 40 days, that's all he was doing. The third set of 40 days, he was doing that in a combination of receiving the second tablets. He comes down after 80 days dedicated towards forgiveness and atonement for the golden calf. His first assembly, the day after he comes down, after proclaiming to them that they are forgiven for the sin of the golden calf, you know what he says? He tells them about the power of observing Shabbat. Why? Because Moses was giving them the key to success, the lesson that they missed up on, unfortunately, the week before. The week before, not the whole Jewish population kept Shabbat. And that's what brought on all these problems. If they would have kept it, there would have been no problem. Moses comes and says, you want to have a successful life? You want to have a danger-free life? You want to see your family flourish, have livelihood and happiness and everything good? The key is Shabbat. We're going to explain why. Why Shabbat? Why can't it be kashrut? Why can't it be anything else? We're going to address that specifically. But that was Moses' message. He had now an opportunity. As we know in everything in life, everything is timing. It's not what you say, it's how you say it, but it's also when you say it. Moses knew now is a very powerful moment in his life for the Jewish people. Right now he was able to give them a strong message. He said, I'm going to make sure I give them the strongest message possible, and that is keeping Shabbat. The reason for that is, as the Talmud says, if the Jewish people were to keep 2 Shabbats collectively, we're talking every single Jew, the Mashiach, the redemption, would finally come. That means every single Jew comes and keeps Shabbat twice, Mashiach comes right away. The first Shabbat was already kept. The week right after Moses gives his great assembly, everyone kept Shabbat. So that was one. We've been waiting over 3,000 years for every Jew to keep Shabbat. One time! It still hasn't happened. God bless, there's a rabbi, the chief rabbi of South Africa, who initiated a couple years ago the Shabbat Project, which he comes and he says, listen, everyone has their own lives, everyone maybe can't commit to keeping Shabbat every week, but there's one annual Shabbat that worldwide we try to convince every Jew to keep Shabbat, because if one Shabbat was kept by every Jew, Mashiach would come right away. But how do you get every Jew? It's so hard. Every single Jew? Well, if we would think like that, we'd never get anywhere in life. We just need to do. We need to take care of ourselves and try to influence those around us. That's all we can do. If we just give up, we're never going to see any light. We're not going to bear any fruit. And therefore, that is the importance of Shabbat. Moses is coming and telling us, you want everything in your life to go good? Take the Shabbat. Here's one more thing. What is the tabernacle called in Hebrew? It's called the Mishkan. Mishkan means that this was the dwelling place, the abode of God, Shochen, in this world. However, Mishkan also comes from the word of, no, not Shochen, collateral. Okay? Mashkon. Mashkon is a collateral. What does that mean? That means that God gave the Jewish people this temple, this Mishkan, as well as further the Bet HaMikdash. He gave it to them as a collateral. What does that mean as a collateral? That if the Jewish people have to, or by mistake, unfortunately, they veer off the path of God, God's not going to destroy the Jewish people. He's going to take back the collateral. He's sparing the Jewish people from destruction. But the Zera Shimshon says, what's going to spare the Jewish people from not even losing the collateral? By keeping Shabbat. He says, listen to this, if the Jewish people would have kept Shabbat, they wouldn't have had to even atone for the sin of the golden calf. If that first Shabbat, if the Tana Aviram wouldn't have ruined it for us, there would be no concept of prayer, atonement, sacrifices, temple, none of that. It would be, and I say this in a joking manner, although it's supposed to be very serious, kind of the way you apologize to your spouse. Sorry. And you just keep on doing it and move on. That's exactly what it is. Meaning, God would have allowed us to sin. We would say sorry, even a genuine sorry for a moment, and there would be no need for teshuvah, no need for atonement, for prayer, for sacrifices, none of the above. But since the Jewish people didn't keep collectively the first Shabbat, then they now had to pray, they had to have sacrifice, they had to have everything else. The power of Shabbat. So now, Rabbi, why do I have to keep Shabbat? Why does Shabbat mean something? I don't connect to it. It doesn't mean something special. Why Shabbat? What's the purpose of Shabbat? So all of these answers we're going to answer by first defining what is permitted or prohibited on Shabbat. The Torah tells us, Kol ha'oseh bo melacha yumat. That we are not allowed to do melacha. Melacha means work. Work is not allowed on Shabbat. So to some, work could mean computer work. To others, no, computer, that's not called work. Work is called building. Or work is called buying and selling. Everyone has their own definition of what work is. So can we define work based on our own subjective definitions? Or do we have to go by an objective or better yet, godly definition of what work is. So to do that, we got to go back to the beginning of the book, all the way back to Genesis. God creates the world in 6 days. What does He do after 6 days of creation? Shabbat Vayakhel. He rests. Now I ask you, everyone can think of an answer, whether you're here, whether you're tuning in online. Listen to the following question. Was God tired after creating the world? Is there such a concept of God being tired? How could He be tired after creating? There's no such thing as exerting energy by God. He is not human. He is infinite. We are finite. We are His creations. We are His creatures. Rather, we have to say God did not rest because He was tired. He rested from doing what He did the first 6 days. What did He do the first 6 days? Create. What did He rest from on the seventh? Creating. If a person has to understand what work is prohibited on Shabbat, it is creating. And now listen to the following analogy or fact of life to some on a weekly basis. You live, suppose, God bless you, you live on the 30th floor of a building, overlooking the ocean. Beautiful. And on the other side, you're overlooking the city. You have two options how to get up and down from your apartment. Option number one is pressing 2 buttons. One to call the elevator, second to get to your destination. And that's it. And take 3 steps in, 3 steps out. Shabbat Vayakhel. That's one. Or we can do the following. You're going to have to inconvenience yourself and go find the emergency exit and hike up 30 flights and bungee jump or hike down the other 30 flights on your way down back to wherever you're going. Now I ask you, what is a relaxing Shabbat? Option A or option B? I think we can all agree that option A is a more relaxing, a more restful Shabbat. We're supposed to rest on Shabbat. However, when we define the prohibited actions on Shabbat as creation, we realize that when we call for that electric pulse, and those signals are now creating electric signals, that's called creating, that's called melacha, that's what's not allowed on Shabbat, and really walking up the 30 flights and sweating bullets and huffing and puffing is keeping Shabbat, and that's restful. And that is resting from creation. That's resting from creating. We create all day long. Things that we buy, that we sell, that we build, that we make, that we come up with. Fire, electricity, all of that is creation. We are told to stop. But Rabbi, why stop? I like creating. Let me create all week long. Pressing the elevator is much easier. Driving somewhere is much easier than walking somewhere. Why do I have to stop creating? 2 main reasons. The first is, when we keep Shabbat, we are standing as witnesses, testifying that we believe that God created the world. Because part of His creating was resting that 7th day. The Talmud says a person cannot truly say they believe God created the world, this is very heavy, unless they really observe Shabbat. Because then it's hypocritical. How can you believe He created the world, but then not rest the same way He did as He told us to? And that is why keeping Shabbat is so powerful. That's on a person to God level. But what about from person to person? I can say for myself, I would say half my family over here. Growing up together with your grandparents, your parents, your brothers, your sisters, your children, your grandchildren, and coming together on Shabbat. If we did not have Shabbat, we wouldn't come together. Gentiles get together 4 or 5 times a year as a family. It's just by the holidays. As a Jew, we get together over 10 times the amount of time. Every weekend on Shabbat. Every Friday night, every Saturday morning, every holiday. It is a gift that we have. But if we want to really enjoy that gift, we need to disconnect to connect. If we want to connect to ourselves, to our family, to God, we need to disconnect. We need to get out of the rat race. Everyone has so many things to do. There are times where I can be having 4 WhatsApp conversations, 3 text messages, 10 emails, and I'm on the phone all at the same time. Is that ridiculous? It is absolutely ridiculous. It's absurd. But we got to do what we got to do. But if we don't stop and relax, if we don't disconnect from it more than just the couple hours we sleep at night, we will turn into, some would say monsters, others would say animals. And it's just a fact. We're just going to be living on instinct and we won't be able to stop and think. Can you imagine what it is to be interrupted non-stop opposed to having complete clarity of mind? I remember as a child, thank God our family practices martial arts and we have a couple lethal weapons in the room, so be careful what you do. And something which as an immature child I used to not look forward to when I got older, I really understood the importance and the great pleasure of it. And the way my father starts every martial arts class is by meditation. It's meditating in the beginning of the class, and it's meditating at the end of the class. Now, why meditate? It's not something that we are worshiping another God or connecting to some type of other forces. No, it's between you and yourself. And the meditation in the beginning of the class is different than the meditation at the end of the class. The meditation at the beginning of the class is getting everything that's on your mind from what was beyond that door until you got here. Try to filter it out of your mind. And now prepare to practice, prepare to grow, prepare to engage in discipline and to learn new. That is what you're about to do, so stop and think about it. And then at the end, to meditate, to internalize what was done, and now open that door again. Because there are things in life which you can put in compartments and close and not look at again, but then there's the reality of life. So internalize what was done and now go out and conquer and take care of what you put on pause. And I remember my father always saying, you know when someone calls and asks and texts and questions and you feel the urge and the need that you need to answer right away, and if not, nothing's going to get done? For the hour or two of when someone puts their phone away, whether it's for Torah study, whether it's for prayer, whether it's for practicing martial arts, whether it's for sports, whether it's for going to the gym, whatever a person does, not everything, but a lot of what you were going to do got taken care of on its own. And whatever didn't, you are now going to efficiently bang them out. Something which would have taken you all 2 hours to take care of, afterwards, after the fact, after a 1 or 2 hour pause, you can take care of it in 10, 20, maybe 30 minutes. And that's using your efficient time. That's gaining a clarity of mind. Now, not everyone has the discipline to go to the gym, or to put their phone away during prayers, or during Torah. It's not so easy. Shabbat, we are forced to do that. We power off our phone, and we are powering on our soul. We are now connecting. How good does it feel, especially for us men who have our phones always in our pockets, to come to synagogue on Shabbat with nothing in your pockets? It's so much pleasure to know that you're not chained down to technology, which technology helps us in every way possible. But we need to learn how to disconnect. There have been a study been made that very high-level CEOs and businessmen and founders of companies in all different types of trades, over the weekend, they put their phones away. It's not easy, but they trained themselves that by putting it away, you're able to spend time with yourself and you're able to spend time with your family. And they're coming up with this in the 21st century. God told us this hundreds, thousands of years ago. He knew what would be good for us then and what would be good for us now. Nowadays, I say, the observance of Shabbat, or selling the observance of Shabbat, is an easy sale. It's something that deep down we are all craving for. And when we know what it does for us, we really want to connect to it. When a person doesn't understand why it's important, then there's no reason to want. But after learning and after knowing, it means so much to us. Now everyone's at their own level. Some people, all they do is light Shabbat candles, and then the rest of Shabbat is like another day. Others spend Shabbat Friday night altogether, and then it's another day. Others keep Shabbat fully. But what this means is that each and every one of us, if Moses, his prime message, his first message after the forgiveness of the golden calf was Shabbat, it should be our message also. Each of us on our own level. Each of us taking on something. Each of us learning about something that has to do with Shabbat. The Chafetz Chaim wrote that anyone who doesn't study the laws of Shabbat on a daily basis is guaranteed to not keeping Shabbat properly. That's how intricate the laws of Shabbat are. There's 39 melachot, primary categories of things which are prohibited, plus tax brings us to 1,000 different prohibitions on Shabbat. Literally. And therefore, when we learn about it, we're able to connect it. And we're able to connect it, we're able to say, that's how the Torah quantifies creation, and that's what I'm not supposed to be doing. And this, which seems like I'm exerting a lot of energy, that's not called creation, and I'm allowed to do that on Shabbat. When we connect to Shabbat the way God, who created Shabbat and created us, intended for us to do it, that's how we reap and we get into the deep blessing of Shabbat. As human beings, we think we know what's best for us. We think that I don't need to relax that way, let me relax this way. We can disconnect this way and not that way. We think we know it all. We think we know what's good for us. But when someone comes and they bring you a new computer, and it comes with a manual, and you say, I know how to use this already, but it's different. It's a new model. It has a different programming. If you have a little bit of patience and you read the manual, you will use it properly. Nowadays, if God would have given the Torah in the 21st century, it would have come with a YouTube video explaining how to do it, because no one reads manuals anymore. And doesn't matter how you learn it, but as long as you get the directives, you get the rules, you figure out how to do it, that's fine. But God created us, and He also told us how to maintain ourselves to be happy, successful, and prosperous with everything that a person needs in their life. And one of those main keys, if not one of the most important, is observing Shabbat. According to the Zera Shimshon, even though the first temple was destroyed for the 3 cardinal sins, which is murder, idolatry, and adultery, and the second temple was destroyed because of baseless hatred, the temples would have never been destroyed if the Jewish people would have preserved Shabbat, because then God would have never had to take back His collateral. If we keep Shabbat, that's why he explains that the Talmud says when we will keep Shabbat collectively, that's when Mashiach will come back. The third temple will be brought back. Keeping Shabbat, again, is so easy. But we all need to just get on the track. We just need to be, if we need to get north, we need to be on the train track heading north. It doesn't matter how fast you're going, as long as you're moving and you're going in the right direction. Each of us on our own pace. And that is how God knows better than us. We don't have the answers to everything. We will never know it all. We are finite. But God, who's infinite, He told us how to do it the best for us. Now I want to move on to another topic in this week's Torah portion. I'm going to draw a similar conclusion, and we're going to make the women very happy with this conclusion. The Torah says in its construction of the tabernacle that there are various tapestries made. out of wool, out of goat's hair, and all these other beautiful, sewed in with gold, all these beautiful masterpieces of art, literally art. And the Torah says something very interesting about the women. Listen to the following verse. The verse in chapter 35, verse 26 reads as follows. V'chol hanashim, and all the women, asher nasa liban otana b'chokhmah, whose hearts inspired them with wisdom, tavu et ha'izim, they spun the goat's hair. Again, the women had a inspiration from their heart, and that wisdom is what allowed them to spin the goat's hair into the beautiful tapestries. Comes the Zera Shimshon and asks, a person following their heart is no praise. I thought this verse is coming to praise the women. However, our sages tell us the difference between a righteous person and an evil person is the following. A righteous person is able to control their heart, meaning they're able to control their desires, their lusts. And a wicked person follows their heart. Whatever their heart says, they do. Oh, you want to eat that? It's not kosher. Oh, you want to be with that woman? Oh, she's not allowed to you. But the wicked person follows their heart, follows their desire. A righteous person is able to control their heart. Based on that, the Zera Shimshon says, it seems like an insult to the women that they were inspired with their hearts and wisdom to make these beautiful tapestries for the Mishkan, for the Tabernacle. On the contrary, it shows how wrong they were, how not in control they were of their emotions, that they had to follow their heart to do this. So Zera Shimshon says, no, that's not what it means. It means as follows. The type of work needed to make these beautiful covers in the Tabernacle was no ordinary craftsmanship. It was something that was very special. It was like an art. It was something that when someone would come, you would need exceptional wisdom to make it. You can't just work hard and get it. It wasn't like something else that, you fall off your bike when you drive it, and you fall off and eventually you get it. You will not eventually get how to spin these goat hairs and the wool and everything else and the gold, all of these things to make these beautiful covers, if you did not put and invest special effort, special time with the desire to do it for the sake of God. There was a special aspect of going beyond oneself, lending their heart to learning the craftsmanship needed. And this was a praise to the women, because they were the ones who had the desire to spend the time and the effort on learning how to do it. Because their desire was so much for the sake of God and the sake of the Jewish people and the sake of this beautiful tabernacle, they were the ones who invested, and they were the ones who opened up their minds to learn something new that they didn't know how to do. I can't say for nowadays, but I'll say for my grandmother and for my great-grandmother and all of our great-grandmothers and great-great-great-grandmothers. There was a time, till not long ago, that every woman knew how to sew. I'm not going to say by a show of hands, I don't want to embarrass anybody, but who knows how to sew nowadays? Very few people, especially in the millennials. I'm sure I don't know what the statistic is, I'm sure 90%, if not more, of millennials do not know how to sew. However, back then, you think the women didn't know how to sew? Of course they knew how to sew. You wore what you made, and that's how it was for hundreds and hundreds of years. So imagine a woman coming, and Bitzalel, who's 13 years old, he was the chief architect of the building of the Mishkan. He comes and tells her, no, don't do it this way, do it this way. Would you give him a look and say, you're going to tell me how to sew? You're going to tell me how to make? I was making clothes before you were born. They didn't do that. The women came with a desire to contribute their time, their hearts to God. They came with an open mind. This is something which we learn from the dimensions of the Aron. The Aron, which was the you call it this very special golden box that kept the tablets. It kept, the Aron Kodesh kept the new tablets, the broken tablets, and eventually also a small amount of man, wonder bread, to keep for the generations. That's what was inside this. The dimensions of it was 1.5 amot by units by 1.5 by 2.5. All broken numbers, all half numbers. It wasn't 1 by 1 by 2 or 2 by 2 by 3. It was 1.5 by 1.5 by 2.5. And our commentaries, specifically the Kli Yakar, says, what's going on? It says as follows. What does the Aron HaKodesh represent? It represents Torah. Torah represents knowledge and education. If you want to learn something from someone else, you need to come and feel like you are lacking, like you are missing. Because if you walk into the situation saying, you know it all, you're not going to learn. And something I learned in my life, and I'm sure something that many of us have come across, that you can learn something from every single person. Whether they're older than you, whether they're younger than you, whether they're Jewish or not, whether they're smart or not, whether they are successful or not, whether they're your family members, whether they're your enemies. You can learn something from every single person. And when you live your life, when you walk around saying, I'm able to learn from everybody. I'm able to learn from those who love me and those who hurt me. From those who are bigger, from those who are smaller, from those who are smarter, from those who are less fortunate. When you walk around living life saying, I'm not Mr. Know-It-All, I'm not Mrs. Know-It-All, I'm able to learn something from everybody, then we're able to grow. We're able to advance in life. The women came and they dedicated their hearts. They said, we're going to learn something new. We're going to put the effort, we're going to invest in it. They invested their hearts, they invested their emotions, they invested everything they had. And the Zera Shimshon says, this is one of the greatest praises. The great praises that are given to the women. Number one, that the Jewish people were granted exodus from the land of Egypt due to the righteousness of the women, due to the belief and the trust in God that the women had. It wasn't the men, it was the women. And due to their exceptional devotion that they had towards making these tapestries, God blessed them forevermore. It was something where they gave of themselves, God gave back to them. He gave back to them through their children and through their descendants. Mothers as a matriarch. They became matriarchs in their own families, each and every one. When we approach Shabbat and say, maybe I don't know better. Maybe I want to do something, but the Torah says not to do it. You don't know everything. When you open your mind and you want to learn, and you want to know how, you want to know what, you want to know why, then we're able to advance. When we look at the concept of knowledge, concept of learning, concept of Torah, the dimensions of the box, the chest that holds the Torah, are all in broken numbers. Because if we think we know it all, we're never going to learn. If we come to learn Torah, if we come to learn sewing, we come to learn architecture, we come to learn accounting. If you come thinking you know everything, you're not going to learn anything. Come with an open mind. Come with an open heart. Specifically when it comes to Torah. Learn, read, listen with an open mind, with an open heart, and we will advance. Again, all God wants us to do is to advance. Advance in the right direction, at your own pace when it comes to Shabbat, when it comes to keeping kosher, when it comes to family purity, when it comes to learning Torah, when it comes to prayer. Do it at your own pace. But just do. If you do, God will do for you. So may the merit of the Zera Shimshon, the merit of keeping Shabbat, and the merit of our matriarchs who devoted their hearts to God and to the Tabernacle, may we all be blessed to have not only ourselves devoted to God, but our children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren devoted to God, to Shabbat, and primarily to His Torah. Amen v'amen. I'll take questions. Perfect.